In 1993, 7 children boarded a school van in Wren Hollow, Tennessee. It turned left onto a road no map had ever shown. No driver was ever found. No crash, no wreckage. Just silence and a town that stopped asking too many questions. 30 years later, a postcard showed up in my mailbox, drawn in crayon, signed by a name I hadn't spoken aloud in decades. And 5 words that made the blood drain from my face. We're still painting. Come soon. Before we start, hit subscribe to help uncover stories they tried to erase. Some disappearances are tragedies. Others are invitations. My name is Evelyn Dale. I'm 62 now, living quietly in a small apartment just outside of Knoxville. I used to be a teacher art, mostly, before I packed my brushes and lesson plans away for good. These days, I water a few plants on my windowsill, sketch in the corners of library books, and try to keep the past where it belongs. Back in 1993, I taught at Wren Hollow Elementary, a rural K-6 tucked into the folds of the Smoky Mountains. It was the kind of school with 1 bell, 3 buses, and the same lunch menu every week. Parents waved from pickups, kids left their backpacks in cubbies, and I knew every student by name and usually by their favorite color, too. There wasn't much to Wren Hollow. A hardware store, a diner, 2 churches, and a lake that used to draw a few tourists in the summer before it started shrinking year by year. Folks looked out for each other mostly. You could leave your door unlocked, your headlights off, your keys in the ignition. Things didn't happen there. Not big things anyway. That spring, I was running an after-school art program. Small group, just 7 kids. All of them with this quiet way of seeing the world, not loud, not troubled, just different. The kind of kids who spoke more with their hands than their mouths, who stayed late to finish a painting instead of rushing out the minute the bell rang. Their names were Caleb, Simone, Elena, Jacob, the twins, Rafi and Remy, and Lily Moore. Lily had only just moved to town that February. She was 9, soft-spoken, always sketching skies with no sun. Every Tuesday and Thursday, those 7 climbed into the van marked Route 9 at 7:04 sharp. Harold Wynn was their driver-kind man, part-time, always tipped his cap when they boarded. That van was as predictable as sunrise. Same hum of tires, same left turn past the post office, same arrival just before 7:30. But that week, I remember something felt off. It was small things at first. One morning, Lily came in early, eyes unfocused, like she'd been dreaming while awake. She looked out the window and said, "There's a place where colors don't fade." I thought she meant a museum. Kids say odd things sometimes. You learn not to read too much into it. The day before the van disappeared, I stayed after school to tidy up. It was quiet. I remember the way the light fell across the paint-splattered tables, the faint smell of glue sticks and dust. I glanced out the classroom window toward the ridge trail and noticed the fog. It wasn't unusual for spring, but that afternoon it came in earlier than it should have. Thicker, too. Settled over the hill like a blanket being tucked in. That night I pulled an old sketchbook from the shelf and flipped to the pages I'd saved. I had started drawing portraits of the kids, just outlines, nothing finished. The plan was to surprise them on the last day of the program, a little gift before summer break. But the pages looked wrong. Not because of what was missing, but because of what felt finished too soon. I didn't know it then, but it would be the last normal night I'd have for a long, long time. And the next morning, when the van didn't arrive, when the phone in the front office rang 3 times too many, that was the moment everything began to unravel. The call came just after 900 a.m. The secretary had dialed my classroom first, but I wasn't in yet. By the time I arrived, the front office was already running through the chain, contacting parents, cross-checking route logs. The van for Route 9 hadn't shown up. At first, we all assumed it was a mechanical issue. Delays happened: flat tires, road closures, a missed turn on the back roads that wrapped around Hollow Ridge like a thread. But when I looked at the clock and saw it was pushing 9:15, I felt something shift in the pit of my stomach. Harold Wynn was never late. That man ran his life by his watch. He kept an old wristwatch with a fraying leather strap and used to tell the kids it was older than they were. They'd laugh and he'd tap the face and say, "Still gets me where I need to be." But that morning, he didn't. By 9:30, the principal called the sheriff's office. By 10:00, search crews were already gathering near the service station at the edge of town. Dogs, four-wheelers, helicopters, when the fog allowed it. I stayed at the school. At first, I tried to distract myself with paperwork, checking the art room supplies, prepping the clay station, thinking maybe they'd just turned back. Maybe someone had gotten sick. But noon came and went, and there was no word. Not a single parent had heard from their child. 7 homes, 7 phones ringing over and over. No answer. The van had been last spotted by a mail carrier, a man named Alan Rush, who said he saw it make a left turn off Hollow Ridge Road around 7:20 that morning. But when investigators checked the stretch, he described there was no road. Not a gravel pull-off, not a logging path, just trees. He insisted he'd seen it, though. Said it looked like it was floating, a little drifting through the mist. Another hiker 2 miles east said they caught a glimpse of yellow through the fog just before it dipped behind the Cedar Ridge. But that was it. No tire tracks, no broken limbs, not a single candy wrapper or lost mitten or scrap of paper. The dogs couldn't pick up a scent past the last turn. They ran in loops, confused. One handler told me later it was like the trail just folded into itself and disappeared. They searched for 2 weeks. Every trailhead, ravine, drainage pipe, and deer run in a 10-mile radius. They even brought in ground-penetrating radar. Nothing. The sheriff held a press conference on day 14. He used words like ongoing and multi-agency and no evidence of foul play at this time. But we all knew what it meant. The trail had gone cold. By May, the flyers were everywhere, taped to diner windows, gas pumps pinned to corkboards at the post office. 7 children, 7 school portraits cropped to fit. They used the same picture of Harold from his county ID badge, the one where his eyes were half closed, but he was still smiling. I kept one of the flyers folded in my desk drawer next to the extra chalk and the spare name tags. I don't know why I kept it. Maybe because it didn't feel real yet. Maybe because I thought someday they'd come back and I'd need to show them how we'd looked for them. The official report eventually called it an unresolved disappearance involving school transport. The state closed the case within 6 months. Without physical evidence, there wasn't much else they could do. Parents drifted away. Some left town. Others stayed but stopped answering questions. I saw Lily Moore's mother once at the grocery store about a year after it happened. She looked thinner, wore sunglasses even indoors. We nodded but didn't speak. What could I possibly say to her? That I still heard Lily's voice in my classroom sometimes. That I had dreams where the van pulled up out front and the kids spilled out like nothing had ever happened. The school board shuttered the Route 9 art program that summer. Not officially, but quietly. They removed the painted sign from the van lot. They dissolved the enrichment funds into general curriculum. My classroom stayed open, but the light changed. The energy wasn't the same. I taught for 5 more years. Then I boxed up my things and left. I didn't make a big announcement, just a letter on the principal's desk and a pile of lesson plans with my name on them. I told myself I was just moving on, that I was ready for something new. But the truth is, I couldn't walk that hallway anymore without seeing their empty seats, without remembering the sound of their laughter fading down the tiled corridor every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon. I built a quiet life after that. No family, no big circles. I had neighbors, some library friends, a woman from church I shared recipes with now and then. I sketched sometimes just for myself in notebooks on old envelopes on the backs of junk mail. I'd draw trees or faces I only half remembered. I never showed anyone. I didn't want to explain what they were. And then one morning, exactly 30 years after that, Van vanished. A yellowed envelope appeared in my mailbox. No stamp, No return address. Just my name, handwritten in small, uneven letters across the front. I knew the handwriting before I even opened it. Not the shape, not the style, but the feeling. I opened it slowly. Inside was a piece of thick paper, the kind I used to hand out in class. Crayon strokes covered the front. 7 stick-figure children, arms linked, standing in front of a yellow van. And above them, in crooked, jagged letters, "We're still painting. Come soon." I stared at it for a long time. Not because I didn't understand, but because I did. In the bottom corner, almost hidden in the waxy green, was a name. Lily M. It wasn't possible. Not really. But as I held it, the air around me shifted. Not colder exactly, just still. Like the apartment was listening. Like the room had been waiting. That night I didn't sleep. I placed the postcard on the table beside my teacup and left the light on. Every hour or so I looked over, half expecting the drawing to change, for one of the figures to wave or vanish. But it never did. The next morning I opened the long drawer under my bed, the one I hadn't touched in years. I pulled out the sketchbook, the one with the children's names on the inside cover. I flipped to the last page they never got to finish. There they were. Caleb, Simone, Elena, Jacob, Rafi, Remy, Lily. Their faces sketched in charcoal. Soft, wide features. Expressions that didn't look straight at you, like they were watching something just beyond the frame. I set the postcard beside them, and for the first time in 3 decades I picked up the phone. The number still worked. The voice on the other end was slower now, raspier, but I recognized it right away. Clara Hines. She was a deputy back then, just out of the academy. Now retired. "You kept the sketchbook," she said. Not a question. A statement. I told her about the postcard, about the name in the corner. There was a pause. Then she said, "That road's still there, you know. Hollow Ridge. They blocked it off after the investigation, but they never paved over it." I asked why not. She hesitated, then said, "Because something about that stretch never made sense. Tire tracks went in. None came out. And ground radar showed nothing. It's like the road turned, or ended, or disappeared." I held the phone tight. My eyes drifted to the postcard again. I asked her, "Do you think it's real?" Her answer was quiet. "I don't know. But if you're going back, don't go alone." I didn't tell her I already planned to leave that weekend, that I'd already packed a bag, that I'd written a note and left it on my kitchen counter just in case. It said, "Gone to Wren Hollow. If I don't come back, it means I found them. And somewhere in my bones I already knew they'd been waiting this whole time for me to return." The drive into Wren Hollow felt longer than it used to. Not in distance, but in weight. The hills rose steeper, the trees seemed taller, more watchful. Fog started curling through the trees before sunset, even though the forecast had promised clear skies. By the time I passed the old water tower and the faded welcome sign, I could feel the town pulling in around me, familiar and distant at the same time. Population still listed as 1382, still small enough that people remembered especially the things they didn't want to talk about. I pulled into the inn just off Main Street, only one in town. The woman at the front desk looked up from a crossword, and her smile faded the moment she recognized me. "You're Miss Dale, right? From the art program." I nodded. She glanced over her shoulder, then leaned in. "You here because of the postcard I didn't answer right away?" Her voice lowered. "We didn't get one, but someone left a drawing in the mailbox a couple weeks ago. No name, just a tree, and 7 kids in front of it." She handed me the folded paper from beneath the counter. I opened it carefully. The tree was the old twisted cedar that stood at the top of Hollow Ridge. I remembered it right away. It had always reminded me of a bent hand reaching toward the trail. Local kids used to say it watched you, that if you walked behind it, you wouldn't come back the same. The drawing showed it clearly, with eyes sketched into the bark and 7 stick figures at its base. In the bottom corner, written in soft blue crayon, were the words, "We never stopped. We just turned left." I stayed up that night in my room sketchbook, open, lights off. The motel walls were thin, and I could hear a TV playing through the wall, but it faded beneath the silence inside me. I kept thinking about something Lily had said the week before she disappeared. I'd asked the kids to draw their favorite place. Most of them picked bedrooms, parks, vacation spots. But Lily had paused, looked out the window, and whispered, "Mine hasn't happened yet." But I saw it. There's no sun, but we don't need it. The sky is gray and everything's soft. And there's a place to paint forever. At the time, I thought she was just being imaginative. She always spoke that way, just slightly out of sync with the rest of us. But now, I wasn't so sure. The next morning, I left before breakfast. I parked near the barricade at the base of Hollow Ridge Road. The wooden sign was still there, half-eaten by moss, Wren Hollow Ridge Trail, not maintained, travel at own risk. The gate was rusted open. I stepped over it and followed the path upward. The air smelled like damp pine and wet soil. Fog settled low, soft but dense, like the trees were breathing through it. I kept walking until the gravel narrowed and the brush thickened. Then I saw it, a tree trunk, dark and gnarled, carved with names. Not deep, just faint marks like a child had used a rock or the end of a key. I knelt to look closer. Lily, Caleb, Jacob, Simone, Rafi, Remy, Elena. 7 names. And just below them, not carved but burned into the wood, an 8th Evelyn. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out a pencil. I pressed the lead gently into the bark, tracing the edge of the final name. My name. It didn't feel out of place. Not anymore. It felt overdue. Like something had been waiting for me to acknowledge it. Behind me, the wind shifted. A light rustle through the pines. Then came a sound I hadn't heard in 3 decades. A low mechanical groan. Metal on metal. I turned slowly. The fog thickened, but through it I could see something in the trees. A shape. Long, rectangular, yellow. The van. I moved forward without thinking. My boots sank into soft mud as I crossed the clearing. The vehicle was wrapped in vines and moss, but the paint was clean. No rust, no broken glass, no sign it had aged at all, like it had never been gone. Just paused. I stepped up to the door. The handle was cold, but not frozen. I touched it, and it opened without a sound. Inside, everything was as I remembered. The seats, the cracked side mirror, the little dent above the rear door that Caleb had made with his backpack. I stepped inside. The air smelled faintly of old crayons and something sharper, turpentine maybe? Art supplies. It hit me all at once how small the space was. 7 child-sized seats. One in the back that had always been left empty. That seat had a canvas resting on it now. Small, square, still wet. I crouched down and looked closer. It was a painting of the same tree I had just come from, the one with the names. Beneath it, 7 children held hands. And standing beside them was a taller figure. Gray. Unclear. Watching. Me. I backed out of the van slowly. My heart was pounding, but not from fear. It was something else. A kind of knowing. The clearing around me felt shaped, as if it had been arranged. I turned in a circle, scanning the edge of the woods. Then I saw it. A narrow path behind the van, barely visible. Worn not by tires, but by something smaller, repetitive, like children's feet. I followed. The trail dipped gently, winding between tree roots and patches of fern. The deeper I went, the colder the air became. The fog thickened. I walked carefully, placing each step with intention. The sound of the woods faded. No birds, no wind, just my own breath. And then I heard something else. Laughter. Light. Off in the distance. It wasn't playful exactly. It wasn't fearful either. It was steady, like it had been happening the whole time, and I was only now catching up to it. I stopped, put my hand on a nearby tree trunk to steady myself. When I looked back, the van was gone. The clearing was gone. Just trees now. Dense. Silent. The path continued. The fog held steady. And then a voice, close but not directional, spoke. Not loud. Not a whisper either. Just real. Don't stop. I paused, frozen. I knew that voice. Not from a memory exactly. From a tape. Years ago, Lily had made an audio project for class recordings layered over music, soft sounds, snippets of conversation. I'd only listened to it once. Then I locked it away. Her voice on that tape had sounded just like this. Careful. Curious. Just a little out of step. Now it was guiding me forward. The path curved again and opened into a clearing. A glade surrounded by tall trees. In the center was a sculpture. At first, I couldn't make sense of it. Then I saw what it was made from school supplies. Rulers bent into crosses, crayons melted into spirals, pencil boxes hanging from branches, torn pages from sketchbooks nailed into bark, watercolor brushes planted in the ground like small markers, and at the center on a smooth piece of wood a single green handprint. Beneath it, scratched into the surface with a nail, "We're still creating." I stepped into the clearing. The ground felt softer here, like walking on old carpet. I knelt at the base of the sculpture. Tied to it with twine was a bundle of papers. I unwrapped it carefully. Inside were 7 drawings, each one different. Pencil crayon watercolor, each signed with a name. Caleb, Simone, Jacob, Elena, Rafi, Remy, Lily. They all showed the same forest, the same trees, and in the corner of every picture a van, sometimes in the distance, sometimes upside down, sometimes floating, but always there. And in each one standing near the van was a figure, tall, slightly blurred, watching. I looked up. Fog wrapped around the trees like fabric, and just for a second, I saw movement-light footsteps darting between trunks, too fast to follow, too soft to chase. Then the laughter again, more warped this time like an old cassette. I turned toward the sound. "Hello?" My voice was steady but quiet. "It's Miss Dale. I was your teacher. I'm not here to hurt you." Silence. Then a breeze. Then a voice, same as before. "You were late." I felt my knees weaken. I whispered, "Lily." The response came slow. "You didn't come." "I'm here now," I said. Nothing answered, but just before the fog closed in again, I saw it. A narrow path lined with old paintbrushes stuck bristle first into the soil, pointing toward the woods. A trail laid out just for me. I didn't hesitate. I followed. Whatever this was, it hadn't let go, and neither had I. The trail narrowed as I moved forward, low branches forcing me to duck the air growing heavier with every step. The forest had quieted in a way that didn't feel natural. No rustling, no wind. Just the soft sound of pine needles breaking beneath my boots. Each brush I passed had its bristles angled in the same direction, as if the path itself had been swept open, waiting. I don't know how long I walked. Time felt strange in there. The sky never changed. The fog dimmed the light, but it never darkened. My legs ached, but I didn't stop. I kept thinking about that green handprint, those drawings tied in twine, the way Lily's voice had slipped out of the air like it had never left. I wasn't afraid. Not exactly. But the further I went, the more I felt like I was walking backward through something not space, but memory. A slow unraveling. The trees parted again, and I stepped into what looked like a room. Not a building, not really. Just 4 crude walls, no roof. It had been built from wood slats, broken desks, even some old art easels nailed together. The walls were lined with torn lesson plans, some still curled at the edges. I recognized the handwriting. Mine. On one of the far walls, written in thick black charcoal, were the words, "The classroom doesn't end." I reached out and touched the edge of a desk, smooth but soft from moisture. The door creaked open on its own behind me, though I hadn't seen it before. Inside, it smelled of paint and floor wax. The scent brought me back all at once. Room 12B. Mornings with clay dust in the air. Laughter under the hum of fluorescence. A chalkboard at the front of the room, always smudged, never clean. There, resting at the front, was my chair. My old one. Same scuffed legs, same backrest with the small tear in the vinyl. On the desk in front of it, a new sketchbook. Cover blank. Inside, a single message in faint pencil. "We remember you. Do you remember us?" I sat down without meaning to. My body just followed the weight in my chest. The air inside the room held a kind of pressure like the world outside was holding its breath. I opened the sketchbook. The next page wasn't blank. It was a hallway. Slanted lockers, a single open door. Room 12B. Someone had drawn it from memory or from inside it. The scale wasn't quite right, but the feeling was. The fluorescent light bleeding just enough to make the corners dark. The way the tiles looked more yellow the further you walked. I closed the book slowly. It didn't feel like evidence. It felt like acknowledgement. When I stepped back outside, the forest had changed again. Same trees, same cool air, but the underbrush was gone. The trail was wide now, easy to follow. And just ahead of me, through a break in the fog, I saw a building that shouldn't have been there. It was the school. Wren Hollow Elementary. Not boarded up, not decaying, just there. Perfect. Restored. The front doors gleamed like polished glass. The old banner above the entrance still read End of Year Art Show, May 14th, 1993. I walked up slowly. The gravel shifted beneath my shoes. A few steps closer and the handle met my palm like it had been waiting. I pushed the door open. Inside, the lights flickered on one by one. The air was still, warm, not stale like an old building. Alive. The hallway stretched exactly as I remembered. Same trophy case on the left, same slight tilt to the floor. Student artwork still lined the walls, painted suns, handprint turkeys, paper masks with names scrawled in crayon. I passed the nurse's office, the front desk, the supply closet I used to restock on Thursdays. Then I turned the corner and saw the door to room 12B. Open. The room inside looked untouched. Tables covered in dried paint, bins of markers stacked beneath the windows. Easels still faced outward toward the trees. On the back counter, my old mug chipped, stained, still reading Make Good Art. It was like someone had paused the clock, not broken it. I stepped in slowly. The floor creaked just like it used to under the back leg of my chair. And then I saw the arrangement. 8 chairs placed in a half circle at the front of the room. 7 small, 1 full-sized, my size. On each seat something waited. A broken pencil, a paper crane, a piece of ribbon. I moved toward mine, sat down. There was a piece of paper in front of it. A drawing in soft watercolor. The van again, same shape. But this time the children were walking behind it, holding hands, fading into the mist. Standing behind them, detailed, familiar, a woman with a scarf tied at her neck and a mole just beneath her cheekbone. The label beneath it read, "You didn't drive us there, but you opened the door." I stayed in that room for a long time. I don't remember standing, don't remember leaving, just the sense of movement, the press of time folding again. When I stepped outside, the fog had darkened to the blue of early evening. Below me, down the slope, the clearing had returned, and so had the van, parked neatly, its windows glinting with a faint orange light. I moved toward it slowly. The engine ticked softly like it had just shut off. I circled around to the passenger side. The paint was still fresh. No dust, no wear. It looked exactly as it had that morning in 1993. I placed my hand on the door and felt it give. The interior glowed faintly, not with electricity, but with something quieter. A memory of light. I stepped inside again. 7 seats, just like before, each with a name embroidered along the fabric. Someone had taken the time to stitch them by hand. Caleb, Simone, Elena, Jacob, Rafi, Remy, Lily, and on every seat a folded drawing, new, crisp. I picked up Lily's first. It showed the inside of the van, the view from the last row, through the windshield, the road ahead, and in the rearview mirror, my face. Below it, in pink pencil, you didn't turn the wheel, but you let the road appear. I moved seat to seat, unfolding each drawing. Caleb's was a maze that twisted into forest paths. Simone's full of doors carved into tree trunks. Elena had drawn a map with no compass, just soft arrows labeled feeling not yet almost. The twins Rafi and Remy had drawn 2 halves of a larger picture. One showed children building something in the woods. The other showed those same children disappearing behind hanging canvas sheets like curtains pulled open on a stage. I looked up, and for just a second, I felt the van breathe around me. Not literally, but something in the air shifted, as if it had been waiting for these pages to be turned. Then a voice came from behind me. A child's voice. "You came back." I turned. A boy stood near the edge of the tree line. Pale, thin, maybe 10 years old. He wasn't one of mine. His clothes were too faded, like they'd been worn too long. I asked gently, "Who are you?" He stepped closer, barefoot on the needles. "I don't know my name anymore, but they called me Echo." I asked him if he'd been on the van. He shook his head. "No, I was here before, but I helped them. Helped them do what his voice dropped. Build it. Build what he pointed to the van. The road." I stared at him. "What do you mean?" He walked a few steps closer. His eyes were steady, but far away. They needed a way out, but not all the way. So they made a road that only turns once. It only lets in people who remember. I looked back at the van. My voice came out low. "They're still here, aren't they?" He didn't nod, but he didn't say no. "Not the way you think," he said. "They're becoming." The fog shifted again. Echo turned toward the trees. I asked, "What do they want from me?" He paused, then said, "They want you to remember who you were, before you forgot them." Then he stepped into the woods and vanished. Not like someone running, like someone fading out of a story that was never finished. I turned back to the van. The engine had stopped ticking. The cabin glowed warmer now. I stepped inside, took my seat. The door slid shut on its own. The van began to move, not with rumble or vibration, just the sensation of gliding. The windshield filled with a soft gray light, and up ahead, just beyond the reach of the trees, I saw a curtain of canvas, fluttering, waiting, the same kind I used to hang at the back of the art room when we needed a place to dry unfinished work. As we moved toward it, I realized this wasn't the end of the trail. It was only where remembering started to matter. The van didn't move like a vehicle. It didn't lurch or rumble or shake. It just glided quiet and smooth, like the air around it was folding open to make space. Outside the windows, the forest was gray and formless, washed in a kind of soft light that didn't have a source. There were no shadows, but no clarity either, like the world had been half erased with the side of a hand. I stayed seated, hands resting on my lap, watching the trees slip past without ever changing. I should have been afraid, maybe, but I wasn't. Something about it felt familiar, not the place itself, but the act of moving through it, like I'd been here before in some form and just forgotten how to recognize it. The aisle between the seats stretched slowly. Not physically, but in how it felt longer, deeper, like the van was unfolding into something else. Each seat began to change. Small objects appeared, quiet markers left behind like offerings. I moved slowly from one to the next. The first seat was Caleb's. The fabric had been stitched over with maze patterns, black thread weaving across the cushion in tight, sharp turns. I reached down and touched one, and I swear the pattern shifted beneath my fingers like it was still trying to find its own solution. A voice not loud but certain slipped through the air. I kept drawing the way out, but I think I was drawing the way in. I looked up, but the seat was empty. Still, the feeling lingered like he'd just spoken beside me and stepped away before I could turn. Simone's seat was next. Spatters of paint stained every inch of it, deep red, bright blue gold flecked with green. A brush lay across the lap belt, stiff with dried pigment. I remembered her elbows always covered in color, her fingers never still. Another whisper rode the space above her seat. We made what they couldn't erase, so they had to let us go. I stood there for a while, just watching the colors fade and reappear under the shifting light, then moved on. Elena's was quieter. Her seat was covered in soft black fabric, but it wasn't colorless, it shimmered almost. Shadow and contrast sliding over each other like light through lace. There was no drawing this time, just a smooth stone tucked into the corner of the seat wrapped in black thread. The air around it felt cool. Her voice was the faintest yet. Black and white don't lie. Only people do. I pressed my fingers against the stone and it stayed warm in my palm for several seconds after I let it go. Jacob's seat had a small open book on it, blank pages fanned out like wings. A pencil hovered just above it, not resting, not writing, just suspended. I stood in front of it and remembered the day he'd asked me if paper could hold a secret. I'd told him, only if you draw it quietly. His voice came in, then soft and thoughtful. If we wrote our names, we'd vanish. So we stopped writing. But we didn't stop remembering. The pencil dropped to the page and rolled gently into the crease. Rafi and Remy's seats were side by side, held together with a wide piece of masking tape. A long strip of folded paper dolls stretched across both lap belts. Tiny figures holding hands, their faces drawn in red and blue. Some were upside down. I reached out and touched the center seam where the tape held the chairs together. One of the twins whispered, "She tried to split us." The other answered, "So we built a world with no center line." The paper dolls trembled once, then stilled. Lily's seat was empty, but floating above it, suspended in the warm, still air, was her red ribbon. It turned slowly in place, weightless, like it was underwater. I reached for it, but it drifted just out of reach. Her voice came close, but not loud. "You're almost there." And then the van slowed. The world outside shifted. Ahead of us, a clearing came into view. Wide and circular, surrounded by trees that didn't feel quite real, too symmetrical, too tall, like sketches filled in with just enough detail to fool the eye. In the center of the clearing stood a circle of easels. Each one held a canvas turned inward, all facing the same point at the center. I felt the van stop. The door opened on its own. I stepped out into the clearing. The air was still. No birds, no wind. Just the sound of my boots on soft grass. I walked slowly toward the center, passing canvas after canvas. Each one held a portrait of me, but none of them were identical. One showed me young eyes wide with wonder. Another older paint on my cheeks, shoulders hunched. One had my eyes closed, hands outstretched like I was searching for something. Some were joyful, others tired, others unreadable fragments of a life rendered from the outside in. In the center of the circle stood an empty easel. A blank canvas waited on it. Brushes and paints were set out beneath, all perfectly arranged. I didn't hesitate. I stepped forward and picked up a brush. The bristles were soft, already damp. My hand moved before I decided what to paint. Blue first, then gray, then white. I painted a road, a van, a tree, 7 children, and one woman standing beside them, not leading, not behind, just remembering. When I stepped back, something changed. Not visibly, but in the air. Like the painting had been accepted. Like a lock had clicked into place. The ribbon above Lily's seat drifted down through the trees and landed softly on the grass. I picked it up and tied it around my wrist. The fabric felt warmer than it should have. The van door opened behind me again. I turned and looked back at the easels. The others had gone blank except for one, Lily's. Her canvas now showed all of them standing together beneath a sky made of swirling brushstrokes. At the bottom, written in clean, bold letters, Seat 8, remembered. I walked back toward the van. The ribbon tugged slightly on my wrist like a thread keeping me tethered. This time, when I stepped inside, the van didn't move. It just held me there. Each seat now held a single object. Caleb's had a compass, its needles spinning without pause. Simone's a broken brush, stained red. Elena's the same smooth stone I'd touched before. Jacob's an empty cassette labeled in faint pencil loop number 7, Dream. The twins shared a folded origami figure torn in half, the crease separating a pair of connected faces. Lily's seat was still bare, but on the floor beneath it there was a piece of heavy paper. I bent to pick it up. One side held a charcoal sketch abstract at first, until I stepped back and looked again. It was me sitting at a desk in a classroom. On the chalkboard behind me in Lily's slanted handwriting were the words, "She opened the door because someone once opened it for her." I turned the paper over. The second drawing was older, faded. A young girl with curly hair and a denim jacket, a crayon in one hand. I recognized her. It was me. Not as a teacher, but as a child. The memory came back like a wave breaking. I was 8 years old, spring field trip. I'd wandered from the group, followed a sound into the woods, laughter, soft music. There had been a van, no driver, no adults, just a door swinging open. I stepped inside. I never told anyone. I'd convinced myself it was a dream, but it wasn't. I hadn't vanished, but I had seen something. And somewhere inside I had always remembered. The air inside the van hummed faintly now, not with power, but with awareness. I looked down at the drawing in my hands and whispered, I wasn't just the one who stayed behind. I was the one who'd already been. The ribbon around my wrist pulsed gently like something affirming what I'd said. Outside, the fog began to part again. Up ahead, just beyond the curve of the trail, something waited. Not a clearing, not a road. A shape set into the earth. Stone. Quiet. Built like a root, not a building. And over the door, barely visible in peeling paint, was a sign, the Hall of Unfinished Things. I stepped down from the van. The ground beneath my feet was firmer now. The ribbon glowed faintly in the dim light. I didn't hesitate. I walked forward, toward the place that had been waiting for me before I even knew how to find it. The Hall of Unfinished Things didn't look like much from the outside. A low stone structure half sunk into the slope tucked beneath a canopy of cedar and pine. No windows, no markings beyond the faded sign above the door, hand-painted in pale blue, the Hall of Unfinished Things. The letters were cracked and barely legible, like they'd been wading through decades of weather without asking to be read. I stood in front of it for a while, unsure if I was supposed to knock or call out or wait. But the ribbon around my wrist Lily's tightened just slightly, as if to say, "This is the place." I stepped forward and pushed the door open. Inside it was quiet. Not the silence of emptiness, but of something listening. The light came from nowhere I could identify, soft and diffused like overcast morning. The room stretched longer than it should have, with high walls and rows of wooden panels framing pieces of art. Some were familiar styles I recognized, names I'd taught, but most were not. They were children's work, though, every one of them. Sketches, incomplete paintings, models made from clay and wire and tape, pages from journals with only one sentence, a puppet missing one eye, a diorama built with more glue than structure. Nothing was labeled. But I didn't need names. I knew what this place was. It was what they'd left behind, the things they never got to finish. I walked slowly past each one, trying to take them in. Some were beautiful, others unsettling. One piece was just a canvas washed entirely in gray with a tiny red square in the center, no larger than a dime. Another was a watercolor with no paint, just water stains that shimmered when I moved past. None of it felt random. Everything was placed with intention, like the kids were speaking in a language they'd built from scratch. At the far end of the room, there was a glass case. Inside were 8 objects, 7 laminated name tags from the art program, 1 wrinkled permission form signed and dated May 11th, 1993, and next to them, folded in half, a note written in thick crayon. The edges were smudged, the handwriting uneven but careful. "We're going where art doesn't fade." I stared at that sentence for a long time. My hand rested on the glass. That wasn't a child's phrasing, not entirely. It was something more practiced, more intentional, like they were trying to leave a message that would last through whatever came next. Beside the note there was one final drawing. Older paper, more brittle. The lines were sharper, more deliberate. And I knew it before I even looked closely. I had drawn it. I must have been 8, maybe 9. The paper showed a winding road, a tree with eyes, a van turning left at a fork. And next to it, a small wooden sign that read, "Left is the way back." I remembered that sketch. I'd made it after my own strange detour in those woods, the one I had pushed so deep down I convinced myself it wasn't real. But it was. They had found it. I didn't know how. But Lily had seen it. Maybe all of them had. Maybe they'd used it. And for the first time I realized I hadn't just remembered them. I had led them. Not deliberately. Not by choice. But I had been part of the opening. I had drawn the map they followed. My knees gave out gently. I sat on the cool stone floor in front of the case, that old drawing still visible through the glass. My hands were shaking, but not from fear. I didn't cry loudly, just a slow release like the kind that's been waiting behind your ribs for a long time. I stayed that way for several minutes. Then I heard footsteps. Not fast, not urgent. Just the soft cadence of small feet across stone. 7 of them. They didn't run. They didn't hide. They simply entered as if they had every right to be there, and they did. I didn't turn. I just closed my eyes and said softly, "I see you." And from behind me, Lily's voice, clear now, solid, said, "And now we can be seen." I opened my eyes. The air had shifted. The room was lighter, not in brightness, but in weight. And when I turned, the 7 children were standing in a loose circle around me. Caleb, Simone, Elena, Jacob, Rafi, Remy, Lily. Their faces were as I remembered, young, expressive, but softened too, like they existed on the edge of being. They weren't ghostly. They weren't glowing, but they flickered slightly like they were still being drawn in pencil, their lines not yet fixed. Caleb stepped forward first. He held out a short pencil with bite marks along the side. "You left this," he said. I took it. Simone followed with a blank canvas already primed. She tucked it under my arm. "We saved you a space," she said. The others came one by one. Elena with a chalk box, one color missing. Jacob with a folded paper crane. The twins offered a cracked brush and a strip of ribbon woven between their fingers. Then Lily came last. She knelt beside me and touched the red ribbon tied around my wrist. "You remembered?" she said. I nodded, voice low. I didn't know I had forgotten. She smiled gently. "That's how the forgetting works." We sat together in the center of the hall. The children arranged themselves around me the same way they had in the classroom in the van around the easels. Not a pattern, a circle, something whole. I asked quietly, "Are you staying?" Caleb answered without hesitation. "No," Remy added, "but we're not going far." Elena's voice came soft. "We just had to know if someone still saw us." My throat tightened. I never stopped looking. Lily looked up at me. "We know," she said. "That's why we sent the postcard." The light in the room began to thin. Not fading, just loosening its grip. The walls around us shimmered. The shelves softened. The glass case blurred like condensation. The hall was coming undone, not breaking, just folding itself away. The floor beneath me shifted from stone to earth. The ceiling opened into sky. I blinked, and we were back in the forest. Same trees, same slope, same hush. The children stood a few feet away now, together, their faces calm. Caleb raised a hand, not waving, not goodbye, just a gesture of closure. "Close your eyes," he said gently. I did. When I opened them again, I was sitting in the passenger seat of the van. Morning light poured through the windshield. Birds chirped somewhere nearby. The fog had lifted. The door was open. The van was empty. But the dashboard held something new, a fresh sketchbook unmarked, and, written on the cover in childlike paint, "Come soon." I stepped out into the clearing. The air felt real again. The trees were just trees. The path behind me was still there, but I wasn't alone. I could still feel them. Not watching, not trapped, just moved. And somewhere ahead I knew there was more to find. The story wasn't over. It had simply reached the place where it begins again. The sketchbook on the dashboard was heavier than it looked. Not in weight, but in presence, like it had been waiting for me specifically and wouldn't open until I was ready. I held it in my lap for a long time before lifting the cover. The first few pages were blank, thick paper soft at the edges. Then about 6 pages in something appeared. A charcoal drawing, unfinished but unmistakable. It was the van. Not from the outside this time, but from above, surrounded by forest tires half sunk into wet soil. A faint trail wound away from it, marked by small red dashes that faded the farther they got. And at the bottom, in that same blocky crayon handwriting, they buried what they couldn't control. I touched the corner of the page and felt a texture beneath the charcoal, an imprint maybe. I flipped to the next one. There, in softer pencil, was a map. Not precise. More like a memory of a place rendered with the kind of detail you can only get from repetition. It showed a wooded area, a bend in a road, an overgrown path marked with a jagged X. Beneath it, behind the 3rd mile marker. The soil is thinner. My breath caught for a moment. I knew the area. It was just outside town limits, past where the road crews usually stopped mowing, where the trees grew too thick to see more than a few feet in. I used to ride my bike out there as a kid. There was an old trailhead mostly blocked now. I hadn't thought about it in years. I drove out there the next morning. It was early, just after sunrise. I brought gloves, a small spade, a flashlight. Not because I knew exactly what I was looking for, but because I couldn't not go. I parked by the rusted mile marker number 3, the numbers faded and flaking at the corners. The trail was still there, though, barely, overgrown and wet with dew. I followed the map's direction as best I could, counting paces matching tree shapes. Eventually, I reached a patch where the underbrush thinned. The soil felt looser beneath my boots. I knelt down, pushed the leaves aside, and started to dig. The ground gave quicker than I expected. About 6 inches in, I hit something hard. I scraped, gently cleared more dirt, and uncovered the corner of a wooden box, old weather-worn but intact. I dug around it slowly, carefully, until the top could be lifted. Inside was a layer of plastic sheeting, military green, and beneath it, rows of cassette tapes, each one labeled by hand. Loop 1, Loop 2, Loop 3, all the way to Loop 14. The handwriting was familiar. It matched the one on the cassette I'd found in the van back in the Hall Jacobs. There was a note tucked between 2 of the tapes, folded 3 times. I opened it slowly. They wanted us to forget, so we recorded everything we could before it started again. These aren't memories. They're anchors. Play them in order. Play them out loud. That's how you keep the shape of a thing intact. There was no signature, just a series of small, inked drawings at the bottom, symbols I'd seen on the children's art years ago. I took the box back to my car, cleaned the dirt from my hands, and drove straight to the school. I didn't go through the front doors. I parked in the back near the old maintenance shed where they used to store supplies. That part of the building had been closed for renovations for years, but I still had the key from my last cleanup shift. Inside the shed was an old tape deck half buried under broken chairs and stacks of foam mats. I dusted it off, plugged it in, and loaded the first tape. The sound that came through was faint, warped a little by time, but steady. It wasn't music. It wasn't speech either. It was ambient. A low humming tone overlaid with soft pencil strokes, the occasional exhale, the shuffle of shoes on tile. It sounded like a room breathing, like the classroom alive and aware. Then came whispers. Children's voices, not clear but layered, as if a dozen conversations were happening just out of reach. I sat there for the full loop, maybe 20 minutes, listening with my eyes closed. When it ended, I played the second, then the third. Somewhere around loop 6, things changed. That tape started with silence. Then a soft scraping sound, metal against wood. A child's voice came through whispering, "Draw the door." Then a knock, then another, and then unmistakably the sound of the classroom door unlocking from the inside. My stomach dropped. I remembered that sound. Not in a literal sense, I couldn't place the day or time, but my body remembered it. That slight metallic click followed by the breathless pause before movement. Loop 7 brought something worse. It began with a teacher's voice, mine, calling out a name. Lily. Then again, more urgent. "Lily, are you still here?" Papers rustled. A chair scraped. Then another voice, deeper, not a student's. "She's busy now." The tape went quiet. Then footsteps. Then the sound of the van's door closing. I turned off the player. For several minutes, I just sat there. The air inside the shed felt wrong, too still, too tight. I loaded the final tape. Loop 14. It started with static, then something like wind through trees. A faint melody played on what sounded like a child's toy piano. Then Jacob's voice, clear and deliberate. "This is the record we leave in case we disappear. If someone finds this, it means the loop was broken." Then silence again. Long, heavy. Finally, look under the floor. The old classroom. Behind the stage. I didn't even think. I locked up the shed, grabbed the box of tapes, and went straight to the school's auditorium. It had been sealed for years. Fire code violations, they said, but the back door was still unlocked. Dust coated everything. The air smelled like chalk and mildew. I crossed the wooden stage, found the loose board near the left wing, and pried it up. Beneath was a narrow crawl space. A black plastic case sat just inside. I pulled it out and opened it. Inside were dozens of sketches, photocopies, old originals, newspaper clippings. A binder marked Incident 1994 Internal Use Only. I flipped through it. Staff interviews, disciplinary notes. One teacher had reported unusual student behavior and asked for reassignment. Another said she heard her own voice in the intercom when no announcement had been made. Several pages had been blacked out entirely. Then I found it. A photo grainy printed from a VHS still. A van. Parked behind the school license plate, blurred but the shape unmistakable. In the bottom corner, a date, May 12th, 1994. The day the kids vanished. Behind that photo was one final page, typed unsigned. It read, "You don't find the loop. The loop finds you. It wants witnesses who remember without breaking." She made it out. Now she must choose. The bottom of the page had coordinates. Just numbers. Nothing else. But I knew somehow they weren't random. They were pointing to something buried, something not finished. I stood in that empty auditorium, the binder in my hands, the weight of every vanished voice pressing down through the silence. And I understood. This wasn't just about what had happened to them. It was about the ones who tried to cover it, to bend memory into a shape that wouldn't speak. But the loop had cracked, and through that crack I could hear them. Still speaking, still drawing, still waiting. The coordinates led me 30 miles north, past county lines, past farmland gone brittle in the sun until the pavement gave way to dirt. I drove until the trees leaned in close on either side, thick pines that swallowed sound. There was no sign, no gate, just a break in the tree line and a narrow path just wide enough for a single vehicle. I parked at the edge, left the engine running for a few seconds longer than necessary, then shut it off. The quiet that followed was almost too complete. I stepped out with the sketchbook in my backpack and the cassette tapes sealed in a Ziploc bag. The trail ahead wasn't marked, but I could see tire tracks baked into the earth. Someone had been here not long ago. I followed the path on foot. A mile in it widened slightly, opening into a flat clearing overgrown with weeds. To the left was what looked like a utility shed, gray metal padlocked. To the right, a low concrete building almost swallowed by moss and vine. It had no windows, just a single heavy door that hung slightly ajar. The structure wasn't abandoned, at least not for long. A faint hum drifted from inside electrical rhythmic, like an old server room or a generator left too long without maintenance. I pushed the door open. Inside it was cool and dim. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, a few flickering. The walls were lined with filing cabinets, metal shelving stacks of old computers. In the center of the room sat a single folding table. On it, a reel-to-reel machine still spinning. A tape fed through it slowly, one end hanging loose like it had been interrupted. A stack of labeled files sat beside it, clipped and marked with red tabs. Each one bore a stamped seal I hadn't seen before. Something federal, something restricted. I picked one up. The first page read, Field Recording 14B, Recovery Notes. It was dated 1995. Under Witness, there was a blank line. Then beneath it, Condition Semi-Coherent. Disassociated. I flipped through. Pages of transcribed interviews with children, all unnamed. They described the loop, the classroom, the van, the hall. One voice kept repeating the same phrase. She showed us the way out. Another said, we weren't supposed to leave it open. I moved to the far side of the room where a filing drawer had been left partially open. Inside were more case files, some from my old district, others from counties I didn't recognize. Many were thin. One was nearly 2 inches thick. I pulled it out. On the tab, Whitaker L. terminated. I opened it slowly. My name was listed under Associated Personnel. There was a photo I hadn't seen before, grainy, printed from surveillance footage. It showed me standing outside the school, hand on the shoulder of a child I couldn't name. The timestamp was May 13th, 1994, the day after they vanished. But I didn't remember being there. I'd never seen that image in my life. Below that were printed memos, internal emails, warnings. One from someone named R. Gallows: reactivation risk is rising. Closure protocol failed. She's breached loop containment. Another memo was even more direct. Witness has resumed memory integration. Proceed to final audit. Archive under cold signal. At the bottom, handwritten in pen. Do not let her remember too much at once. The shape will collapse. My hands started to shake. I thought this was just memory, just a mystery. But it wasn't just what happened to those kids. It was what had been done to all of us. The reel-to-reel machine clicked off. The room went still again. I looked up and noticed a small security camera in the corner, its red light blinking steadily. I walked over, stood directly in front of it, and said out loud, "I remember." The blinking stopped. A soft whir came from the opposite wall, and a section of paneling slid back, revealing a second room. Smaller, empty except for a television on a wheeled cart. Old, maybe from the 80s. The screen blinked on without anyone touching it. A grainy video began to play. It showed the children, my students, standing in a circle in the art room. Each had a canvas in front of them. Their hands moved slowly, synchronized, like they were drawing the same thing at the same time. Then, without prompt, they turned their canvases outward. The camera zoomed in on each one. What they'd drawn wasn't a scene or a person, it was a shape. The same geometric form over and over. A kind of spiral intersected by straight lines that bent impossibly in on themselves. It hurt to look at. Not physically, just cognitively, like it didn't belong on paper. The video cut to black. Then a new image flickered on screen, the Hall of Unfinished Things. The camera panned slowly, showing each piece, each drawing, sculpture, photograph. My own sketch was last, the one I'd drawn as a child. A voiceover played distorted and hollow. What is unmade cannot decay. What is remembered becomes pattern. What is buried calls louder. The screen went dark. Then one final image: coordinates, the same as before, followed by a single line: audit begins in 36 hours. I didn't take anything from that room. Not the files, not the tapes, not even the sketchbook I'd left near the door. I walked out into the trees, got in my car, and drove straight to the sheriff's office. I asked to speak to someone off record. Sheriff Lana Whitaker took me into the back and closed the door behind us. I slid one of the recovered drawings across her desk. Said only, "You knew." She looked at it without surprise, then reached into a drawer and pulled out a file already prepared. "I was hoping you'd come back before they did," she said. Inside the file were matching witness statements, people from my district, from other counties, all describing similar disappearances. Buses gone without a trace. School doors locked from the inside. Teachers who forgot they'd taught certain children. The pattern was too consistent to ignore. Lana spoke slowly, her voice level. They used to think it was a leak in the system, something slipping through. But it wasn't. It was designed, contained until someone remembered too clearly. "You cracked it." I nodded. "Then what happens now?" She didn't answer right away, just slid a fresh page toward me, a formal statement of record, witness testimony form. She handed me a pen. "You're going to tell it all," she said, "and we're going to archive it before it slips again." I took the pen, wrote my name, and as I started writing, I heard it again, just faintly from the hall. A child's voice humming the melody from the loop, high off key but steady. I didn't look up. I just kept writing, because I knew if I stopped even for a second, the story would begin to unwrite itself. And this time, I wouldn't let it. The Hall of Unfinished Things was closed within the week. Sheriff Whitaker filed it under a structural hazard, and within days, a crew in unmarked trucks came through to strip it bare. Whatever files were left behind, whatever machines had been running, they were gone. Not boxed up, just removed, like it had never been there to begin with. But I know what I saw. I know what I heard. And the names written in those folders, the drawings on those walls, they were real. They were children. And they didn't just vanish. They were erased slowly, carefully by people who knew exactly how to make a memory collapse in on itself. I finished my statement the next morning, 26 pages handwritten. Sheriff Whitaker logged them under a sealed heading and told me it was enough to reopen the case officially. But when I asked her what would happen next, who would be held responsible, what agency we could contact, she looked tired. Said, "There's no one left to hold. Just gaps where people used to be." Then she handed me a copy of the original missing persons list. 7 children, 1 driver, and my name marked in the margin with a red asterisk. Below it a note, subject classified, memory loop sustained. I asked if that meant I was part of it. She said, "You were supposed to forget, but you didn't. That's what made all the difference." That night I went home and reopened my old sketchbook. I flipped past the pages I'd once believed were blank, and I saw something I hadn't noticed before, faint outlines drawn in layers of graphite so light they barely held shape. 7 portraits, each one incomplete but present, hands half-rendered, eyes sketched and then abandoned. But they were there, the children, not as they were in life, but as they were remembered. I spent hours redrawing them. Not perfect, not precise, just enough to bring them forward again. The town of Wren Hollow doesn't speak much about what happened. They call it the missing van case like it was an accident, like it was just another cold file in a drawer that never opens anymore. But every so often someone leaves a small painting on the bench outside the library, usually done in crayon, always unsigned. One showed the ridge trail in late spring with the fog curling just right. Another showed a ring of children holding hands beneath a pale sky, their feet hovering slightly off the ground. I never touch them. Just sit beside them for a few minutes before the rain or sun takes them back. I don't know if the others made it home, the ones who vanished in other counties, other years. I hope someone like me remembered them too, that they didn't disappear completely, that the shapes they made in this world were seen, even if only for a moment. I've kept the postcard, the one that brought it all back. It's faded now, edges curled, but the drawing is still there. A classroom with no windows, desks arranged in a spiral, and a girl at the center painting with both hands at once. On the back, 5 words. We're still painting. Come soon. I don't know if it was meant for me or just the part of me that never stopped searching. Some stories don't end with justice. Some don't end at all. They settle into the quiet spaces in old sketchbooks, locked drawers, recordings that don't have timestamps. But when we speak them out loud, when we choose to remember even if no one else will, that's how they stay. Not as rumors, but as names, as truths. If this story stayed with you, consider sharing it so no name gets left behind.